Hi, thank you for joining for today's session. Uh, yeah, so we'll wait for a minute more before we start for people to join if there are. Hi, good evening. Yeah, we'll wait for a minute more. And in the meantime, if you have any questions regarding previous sessions or any classes, do let me know. Uh, I'll try to address them and then help you understand them a little better. Okay, so yeah. So today, if you have gone through those lectures, in the last lecture, there's this thing that a concept introduced about sustainable development. So what I thought is, uh, you know, uh, talk about a little more about the sustainable developmental goals. Because they have been a little hot topic recently, uh, and understand what they are and then how they are going to help us uh, in this current situation. Yes. If any time, if you have any doubts, to interrupt me and then ask me, and also let me know if my voice is not clear at any point. Okay, just give me a minute. Yeah. So yeah, let's start. So as I was saying, uh, sustainable development. It has been more or less a recent concept that has been here. So what does this mean? So it talks about development that meets the needs of present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So you're trying to develop yourself, like you want to have technology, you want to you want to have advancements in technology, you want to have advancements in other fields, but these advancements and these developments has to come without compromising the abilities of future generations to meet their own needs. So you're not taking depriving the future generations of some things because of your development. So that sort of development is called as sustainable. So it contains two key concepts within it. So the first thing, the concept of needs, in particular, essential needs of the world's poor. So you have to uh, give much more priority to the essential needs of the world poor. And then there is this idea of limitations imposed by the state of technology and social organization on the environment's ability to meet present and future needs. And then first you have to meet the needs of the poor, and then you have to impose limitations, so that you can have environment sustainability, and so that you can meet the needs of the present and simultaneously the future needs also. So it's basically, if you think, uh, if you're keeping sustainable development in other words, it's basically a principle that we have framed for ourselves that governs human developmental goals. So how do we develop in the society? So it's a set of principles we have kept ourselves, while simultaneously we also give in preference natural systems to provide necessary natural resources and ecosystem services. So if you look at what is sustainability, so it can be a amalgamation of three different things, where you have society, there is societal development, and then you are addressing needs of a society, for instance, uh, like poverty, which we are talking about, or other things that a lot of people need, basic necessities. And there is this economic development, so we need development in terms of economy. And then there is this environment that is being conserved. So where all of these three interact, so that's how where sustainability comes in. So that's what is sustainable development refers to. It's just not, if you just have environment and society being preferred and you don't have economic development, that sort of development will not be sustainable if you miss any of these one. So all of these three things are necessary for the development to be sustainable in terms of society, societal benefits, economic benefits, and environmental benefits. So what are things that are needed, you know, for sustainable development? For sustainable development, you need, capacity to link knowledge with action. So the knowledge that you have gained, you should be able to apply. So you need the link, capacity to link this knowledge to the action. For instance, if you talk in terms of wildlife, uh, you know, let's say for instance, fragmentation affects species. You know there is this knowledge, and then the action is, it can be, you try to form connectivity. So once you form connectivity between two fragments, the effects can be reduced a little bit. So here where the action comes. So there is a need for connecting both the knowledge and action, and capacity to transform developmental pathways. So what all developmental pathways we have, we should have the ability to transform them in a more, different in other directions, which meets, the requirements of it being a sustainable way of development. Capacity to adapt to shocks. Shocks here, it can be any event that, that are unpredicted, that can reduce or, push back our goals. Let's say for instance, COVID-19, which pandemic that happened out of no, you know suddenly, can be thought of as a shock. We should have the caste system should be have the ability to adapt to such shocks and still work on the progress of development. Capacity to promote equity, and and there should be a capacity to govern cooperatively. So it's not, just one body governing all of this. It has to be done cooperatively among different, stakeholders. And you should be able to measure your progress to gauge where are you now, and then what is the current status and what more is needed in different areas. So these are the necessary capacities to, to measure how sustainable development should take place and should is progressing. So going ahead, somewhere in 2013, if I'm not wrong, 2011 to somewhere in between 2011 to 2015, these sustainable developmental goals, were developed. So the this set of goals were, classified into 17 different categories, and each goal has sub goals. Each major goal has different sub goals, which are to be met by different country, all the countries, so that, so that we can have sustainable development together. So if you just look at those goals, the first goal is no poverty, which, is necessary. To, since we are talking about this, about societal upliftment or societal development, no poverty is such case, and then zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation and infrastructure, reduce inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, which is a burning topic that is happening, life below water, life on land, peace, justice, and strong institutions, and partnership for the goals. So, so these are some of the, if you, as if you have gone through these, uh, these are some of those categories that we have already heard of, right? It's not like these are new, but these are just groups so that, a lot of people can be able to, understand those goals better. And the subcategories are different goals, set of goals that should be achieved to achieve this, primary goal. uh, so yeah, then, so if you look at these, let's just have a look at the life on land. which is the goal number 15. So what are different subcategories of developmental goals present in this? uh, forest forest losses, land degradation, and species extinction. So this is what is happening to this currently, because this goal has been kept forward because there is this increase in forest loss, which which everyone might have heard of and watching documentaries, that these things are happening. And not only forest loss, there is a land degradation that is happening. So those lands are turning essentially into wastelands because of us. And then there is an increase in species extinction, which is not new. We have been hearing this from all for a pretty long time. So what does these have to do with us? All these things, they pose a severe threat to people and the planet, like for the survival. Because if you talk about forest loss, so what it happens, forests are storehouses of carbon. Most most of this terrestrial carbon. Forest stores considerable proportion of this carbon. If you are cutting down the forest, you are basically you know taking the carbon dioxide from there and putting them into the atmosphere. Land degradation, which is something, if it's a cropland that has been degraded into some wasteland where the crops can't be grown anymore, it's people, the food security is being kept at a risk. And similarly, species, they perform, each species has its unique function in the bigger scheme of things, like in the ecosystem. You might not see the specific role of a ant. What does the ant do? You might just simply walk over it and it might die, but the specific functions it perform is crucial for the ecosystem it is in, you know to be the way it has been there, or to function properly. The ant might be necessary. So if you just remove the species from that area, you are you might be contributing to collapse of those ecosystems. And these kept together, they pose a severe threat to people. It can be in terms of food security, in terms of uh, like climate change, or it can be threatening the way we live, all these things. So it's really necessary to to achieve, try to reduce these effects. So these 17 of these goals can be grouped into three categories. If you remember from what I was saying earlier, the societal, economic, and environmental aspects of development. Uh, Poverty, zero hunger, health and well-being, education, gender equality, clean energy, sustainable cities, peace, justice. These are all aspects that deal with societal things, how society should be. So this can be grouped into societal aspects. And if you look at decent work and economic growth, industry, reduced inequalities, responsible consumption and production, this can be grouped into economic model. And reducing inequalities can be into societal also. So these are the economical aspects of development. And life below water, life on land, climate action, and clean water and sanitation. These are something that can be grouped under biosphere or environmental aspects of development. So and all of these, for us to able to achieve all of these goals together, we need a partnership for these goals. So that is what the 17th goal is like. We need to partner across different multiple bodies. It can be countries, it can be different members of a society, or different governmental bodies within a country itself. So there's this essential need for partnership for us to able to achieve most of these goals. uh, yeah, so they can be arranged in this way. So we can have biosphere related goals, society related goals, economy related goals, and then together all of these can be achieved if given due due consideration because each of them are important in their own aspect. So how these these sustainable developmental goals came into place in the first place. So there is this interesting thing that happened earlier. There is this concept of millennial developmental goals called MDGs, which which talk about by 2100, which is like end of this millennia. What are the things that should be achieved by us so that you can preserve nature or whatever things? How should we the development go? But these two people, you know, Paulo and Paki. So these two people uh, came with this idea of having this set of goals, short-term goals, that can be achieved, keeping in mind, how these developing countries are happening. So these people are from Colombia. So what happens since Colombia is also one of those developing countries, some of those goals that are put up. If you look at these goals, some of those goals that were framed keeps in mind of how things have worked with developing nations earlier. So most of those developmental goals that were happening or those way things were happening were majorly based on framed by people from developed countries, and with little to no consideration from developing countries. Since these people know what things happen in developing nations, so the way they framed it, aptly takes into consideration how things should work. So yeah, so that's how SDGs came into being because of these two people. And so we know, yeah, we just spoke about what are these goals and how each goal should be, uh, achieved to, to help us understand what is development and what is not, or to say better, to have sustainable development. So we need to have indicators to help us understand how this development is going on. As in, we should be able to measure how good is our progress. Are we on en route to achieve what we wanted to achieve? Okay, so these development indicators or sustainable development indicators have been proposed as the way to see check out for how good are we faring or how things need to be done, so that you can gauge how the performance has been going on. So these are various statistical values that collectively measures the capacity to meet present and future needs. SDA will provide information crucial to decisions of national policy and the general public. So these indicator values can be used to provide uh, for decision making at the for at the national level, and for also for general public to to question the governments, like what you were supposed to do this, what's happening. The goal says that you're not even close or you're not faring well. Why can't you do something? So you can start yeah, you can start gauging what is happening now. So other thing was sustainable SDGs. These yeah, but when these SDGs were proposed, they were proposed to achieve these goals by the 2030 target. So by 2030, they should be achieved. So development indicators are considered are done for every 4 years for such SDG goals. So what does the 2023 report say? So because it's essential for us to understand how the progress is going on. So assessment of around 140 targets. Basically, each goal has sub targets, as I was saying earlier. Assessment of the around 140 targets for which trend data is available. We have compare, you have data from earlier times and then current times for which you can compare and see what's happening. About half of these targets are moderately or severely off track. So those goals are not on track as as thought of. And over 30% have either seen no movement, they have not changed from what it was earlier, that is baseline, or regressed. They had deteriorated and fallen down below the 2015 baseline. So that's when 2015 was the year when these SDGs were proposed. So that year was considered as baseline. So if you look at this, you know, image from the report, uh, i- the way we should try, the way it's to be interpreted as, if you have, you know, uh, a green patch, green shaded region, it talks about that target in that goal, that proportion, that percentage of targets in that goal are on track. While yellow says fair progress, but it's need to be increased very much. But red shows no change or in negative. It has deteriorated from the baseline condition. And then the gray says insufficient data because most of these goals have very little to no data. So some of those targets are not assessed. So yeah, which is really bad. When you are not able to assess, it's really difficult to see where your progress is in the overall schemes. So as you can see, there are very few targets, of each of the all the goals that are being met, and most of the targets are deteriorating or not changing at all, which is really great concern because at least if there is not much progress happening, there should not be a drop in the way things were compared to earlier times, which which says some of these goals are not being considered properly by the people who are responsible for their application. So for instance, if we just look at the goal number G7, which is uh, sorry, just a minute. So yeah, sorry, the goal number 15, which is life on land, we're discussing. uh, G15, it says somewhere around 25% of the targets are on track. Very little is fairly progressing, and then much of it is stagnation or regression. So there is a lot of need for improvement in this, especially for conserving life on land. All those targets are not being met. And since we're talking about this life on land, especially if you just look at the drivers of biodiversity, because life on land talks about biodiversity loss, especially if you look at the direct drivers on terrestrial, freshwater, and different marine ecosystems, you know most of the drivers are due to land use change, or basically use change, either it be land use or sea use. The way how we have been using resources, we change them. And then there is this direct exploitation, which is contributing to a greater to biodiversity declines. And similarly, there are other factors like climate change, pollution, invasive species, and others. There are a lot of uh, factors that are affecting. And then there are indirect drivers also, such as economic and technological drivers, demographic and sociological, conflicts and epidemics. These are also leads to decline in biodiversity. And some of these goals, life on land, life on water, it's they try to put these in the front, so that you need to conserve biodiversity also. And they try to address, some of them tries to address these issues, like once you try to address these issues, you're not only achieving that specific goal, you're also, achieving some other goals also simultaneously. If you try to address the goal of climate change, which is I think goal number 14, you are also reducing, you're also addressing the same goal of conserving life on land and life on ocean, because they're also contributors to some of the targets you're trying to achieve. That is species loss. You're trying to reduce species loss. They are the contributors. So most of these goals are, interwoven among themselves. So once you try to achieve one goal, you are also achieving part of the other goals also. Uh, yeah. And so, how is life on land progressing? What's the current status? What does the current status say? So the report talks about, trends in forest area as a proportion. So there are three things that we talked about. One is loss of forest, or basically reduction in forest area, increase in degradation of land, and species extinction. So let's look at forest area. What is happening to it? So globally, from 2015 to 2020 is the year span what has happened. So Green talks about, there is an improvement of forest, the increase in forest cover with respect to total land. Slight to no improvement is lighter green. Slight deterioration is yellow. Red is, huge deterioration. And there are some places which insufficient data is there. So if you look majorly, along the equator, where, most of the tropical forests are, right? Uh, Here there is, greater amount of deterioration that has been happening. Either it's in Amazonian forests, could it be, equatorial forests in Africa, most of the Africa also, and then Southeast Asia also. So we are not, so which clearly points out, that this some of this target is not being met with. And if you look at India case, it's a really interesting case. It shows it's an improvement. It's what do you guys think the case of India's forest is? Has it improved, or has it not changed much, or has it deteriorated from what, compared to what it says? So, any idea what do you guys think? Just if you feel like, just having if you have an opinion, you can just drop your opinion in the chat box. So it's not like, every person is going to each and every country to get this data. So most of this data is sourced from, governmental assessments or governmental bodies reports. So most of this data is sourced from there, and then where, people try to put all of those reports together and try to find most of these trends, or we use the different studies from different regions and put them together. So that's how some of these, uh, and these stats are known. So anybody has any comments on what is represented here? Are you yeah, do you agree with that India has improved in forest cover for the past 5 years, or you're not sure? You don't know, like what you see is fine. Okay. uh Let me just say what are my views on what I have read and what I have heard from. So most of these, uh, it shows improvement. It's mostly, I presume these are mostly from Indian Forest Survey of India reports, which, talks about what is the cover of forest in India, and it's, I think it's, I'm not sure whether it's generated every year or not. So what they use is basically, they use satellite images to, to classify different areas, and then see how the forest has been changing across time. So one technical, you know, comment that has been haunting these FSA reports was a lot of people, lot of scientists have been arguing that most of they this report considers even those invasive species as forests and even plantations which are not functionally forests as forest cover. So since plantations and then invasive species like prosopis give considerable forest cover when you do it through satellite imagery, it's the report shows that there is an improvement in the forest area, which might not be equivalent of having a forest, you know, regrown from. Yeah. So it's a little dilemma. That's what we call a forest is. It depends on the definition. If you talk in terms of functional forests, that actually represents what happens in a forest, things are not good. But if you just talk about if there is tree cover, you call it forest, then by definition, sure, there is an improvement. But that's not what we should aim for. So that's the case of trends in forest area. And if you look at the proportion of degraded land, uh, so this is a graph. Proportion of degraded land is basically if it moves from left to right from 2015 to 19, it has degraded way better. If it has moved to left, it will suggest that you have reduced degradation a little more. If you look at Southern Asia, which is where India comes in, there is a huge degradation that has happened. You are nowhere close to reducing the degradation of habitat, which you were supposed to do at, when we are trying to achieve the goal life on land. And Australia and New Zealand, they have degraded slightly, but overall there is considerable amount of degradation that has happened from 2015 to 2019. So we have not achieved any of these goals either. So that's why in the recent report we saw that we are nowhere near. And then so there is this other way of assessing how we are addressing the goal of reducing species extinction risks. So what so there is this thing called red list index, so which gives a value of between 0 to 1. So what does it say? If you have a red list index value of 1, the extinction risk of species in that region is 0. So no species in the region is going to go extinct because of any of those factors in the current scenario for a while. But if the value is close to 0, it's very high chance that species are going to go extinct. So what is happening with red list index? You know, if you see over years, from if you just look at here, 0.813 1993 and 0.72 in 2023, the values have deteriorated. The red list index have gradually come down. It says that chances of species getting extinct has increased rather than reducing. If it has supposed to have reduced as to what sustainable developmental goals say, you have to see a rise in somewhere like this, which is not what we are seeing. We are saying more like a decrease. So which says that we are not even meeting this goal of achieving the target. So this is similar red list index is the same thing that what I said. It can be put up between 0 to 1. Uh, this is for red list different regions for a group for birds. Okay, just for birds. Uh, yeah. Okay. Uh, so what does it say? So if you see where India is somewhere around 0.5 and 0.6. It's not in a good place when it comes to uh, the chances of species getting extinct in the India is relatively high. The only other places that are high are very few. See, Mexico, if I'm not wrong, it's Mexico here, and then some African nations, New Zealand, few Southeast Asian nations. So yeah, we are not faring well as a country also, especially uh, with respect to birds. So it's high time that we should be taking consideration some of these goals, because India itself is not able to meet just this one goal. We're just looking at one this life on land. So yeah, and then recent report that just came out a month ago of the same thing talks about how each of these uh, is each of these goals are progressing. So I'll just show how to understand this. We can spend a little more time understanding one or two goals, and then yeah. So it talks about that three things that you should look at for: distance from the target, how far you are from the target. If you have brown, very far; close, darker blue means almost met the target. And then direction of SDG. Where is the direction moving? Is it deterioration? One is deteriorating. Four is it's on track. So it's from 1 to 4. The greater the value, the more on track it is. And then changes between 2020 to 2023. Has it deteriorated? No change. It has increased, or it's not applicable because it's not assessed. So let's have a look at no poverty, which is a goal number one. So eradicate extreme poverty. We are moderately close to that goal. Direction of SDG, limited or no progress. Overall, from 2020 to 2023, it has decreased. It has decreased. It's not increasing at all. And simultaneously, uh, yeah, let's have a look at the goal number 15, which we are talking about. So conserve terrestrial key biodiversity areas. We are doing moderately okayish, limited or no progress. Conserve mountain key biodiversity areas, no progress. Prevent extinction of species, we are very bad. At least there's a deterioration that has happened from from the 2015 baseline. This thing has reduced. Similarly, if you look at life below water, ensure sustainable fish stocks. The fish stocks are reduced from the 2015 baseline. Conserve marine key biodiversity areas. It hasn't changed much. And then we are very far in most of these categories. Even for climate action, reduce global greenhouse gases emissions. We have deteriorated. We have there is considerable deterioration, and then we are nowhere uh, close to achieving that goal either. So this recent report of the 36 SDG targets from the 17 goals, only two were on track as of 2023. Only two goals, namely access to mobile networks and internet usage of the 36. So we are having mobile internet everywhere, mobile network also. 14 showed fair progress with targets just in case if efforts are stepped up. So 14 of these are having fair amount, but they can be reached if if you put up little more efforts. While 12 showed limited or no progress. So limited or no progress are those circles, and 8 targets were accessed as still deteriorating. They're still deteriorating and we are doing nothing. Like for instance, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, fossil fuel subsidies, number of if you talk about peace, justice, and strong institutions, number of unsentenced detainees, and sustainable fishing and food security, preventing the extinction of species. These are all things that that are deteriorating. And then yeah, so we are very far away from achieving some of those goals which are set up for to achieve by 2030. So recently, the halfway mark for sustainable development goals meeting has happened in New York on 18th and 19th, just I think a week ago. Uh, so where some of these things, some of these results have been discussed. It's the progress of how each of these goals is happening, and where all the member countries have attended and try to see goals where they are, and then try to uh, say what all things are needed to further bring these on track. So it's SDG Summit 2023. Yeah. Some of the scientists who who are involved in this study, uh, they said that s- those 17 goals outlined in 2015 will be met. Uh, none of the 17 sustainable development goals will be met by self-imposed 2030 deadline. So what you're saying is like by the deadline, none of them is going to be you know achieved. But there are signs that these SDGs having an impact on how we see things or how we are thinking of development with respect to those goals. So does it mean we know that we are not going to achieve it by 2030? So if we don't achieve, are we supposed to leave it as such and then forget everything what we have put in? No. Since we have it's the people who propagated the SDGs, the two people we spoke about earlier. So they said that this is more like a should be more like a fluid deadline. We have to commit by this time, but we can take little while longer to achieve some goals because there is things you might not achieve as you plan. And then similarly, uh, not yeah, and only 15% of the 140 targets for which data is available look likely to be met. And then there are 29 targets that are not assessed at all. So so some people say that the rescue mission is urgently needed for us to reach these goals by the year 2030 deadline. And similarly, this is except from this SDG summit that happened recently. Uh, the achievements of the SDGs is in peril, but and years of sustainable development gains are being reversed because of a lot of things that are happening. And some of this progress has been very slow. And then they say that we need to you know come together and then try to reduce this inequality and then try to achieve this goal together. So yeah. And similarly, uh, it's not like some of these SDGs are just going as such. uh, this was the second SDG summit that happened, and then it's already off track because of COVID pandemic. And then without immediate course correction, uh, achieving the SDGs is kind of uh, little difficult. That's what the at least that was the outcome of some of the things that are brought up during this meet. So yeah, so people have recognized that that we are not on track, and then we need to achieve them together. And then if you look at SDGs, sustainable development goals in terms of climate change. So as you might be aware, we are all trying to limit the warming level below to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And if you want to achieve that, sustainable developmental goals, achieving sustainable developmental goals is going to help. That's what this 2023 IPCC report has said. At least they say. They said. So if you look at here, this is more most representation of events like COVID pandemic, where if from here if the condition doesn't improve, we are going to deteriorate and we are not able to meet this our developmental goals. We'll have all these things that lead to climate change effects like high emissions, reduce the options for development, ecosystem degradation, increase climate risk. But if you're if you act now and then if you plan to achieve climate resilient development, which is what sustainable development also tries to put up. uh, if you reach by 2030 sustainable, if you reach the goals of sustainable development, there is a high chance you can limit the climate warming to below 1.5 degrees and have development also. So yeah, these are, so this is how they're trying to link between these goals and then achieving, uh, trying to reduce the impact of climate change. And yeah, even the recent G20 summit that happened in India, New Delhi, where there's this discussion on how these SDGs have progressed recently. So where, yeah, how? So there have been discussions going on to how should this progress on sustainable development goals happen, and how these G20 countries should come together to achieve these uh, goals. So yeah, so according to this, current analysis, these goals which we have set up for ourselves, we are nowhere near achieving them. We are very far from achieving most of those goals, which is little concern that people have brought up, because if you are nowhere close to achieving mid target somewhere midway, because 2015 it has been set up, 2019 2023 is somewhere around 8 years, and then we have 7 more years to achieve those targets, and we are not even progressing in the direction that we wanted to. So it brings in lot of uh, you know questions on the ability of whether we can achieve these goals or not. Yeah. So, and there are even if you talk about peace, justice, and strong institutions, uh, so there have been instances of national human rights issues that have been coming up recently, especially uh, the conflict between different countries have been rising. If you talk about Ukraine Russia conflict, and even different countries that have conflicts. So all these things, it's not just, so these goals are not just focusing on one aspect. You're trying to focus on societal, environmental, and uh, even these economical aspects. So yeah, that's all is from me for today. So, and the other thing, the other point I would like to add is, uh, some of these goals that are present are not something new to as at least as a country. I feel some of these goals or the targets are not something we have started to achieve, want put up, we want to achieve this goal by 2030. Some of these goals are being there in India, but they are just clubbed onto those goals. Like for instance, uh, we talk about poverty eradication. There is this scheme that has, then there are for instance, or uh, not that thing. Let's take something. Yeah, let's talk about ensure primary education completion. If you talk about that thing, there is, if you India offers that thing, at least in most of the government schools. You can have, more pre primary education that happens. And so some of these goals are already, at least in the Indian context, some of these goals are being put up by different ideas that were there already, but they're simply those progress of those goals can be, can also talk about the progress of this specific goal. Some of those targets are the same. It's not like, some of those India, after trying after these SDGs, it started like, we should start this. And if you talk about protection, preventing extinction of species, it's not like it just like from 2015. So okay, so we wanted to have sustainable development, we'll stop extinction of species. It's not like that. It's most of these things are not, started abruptly. Most of these have been going on in the country for, for years altogether. Like for instance, for prevention of extinction of species, we have Wildlife Protection Act and then wildlife schedules, which categorizes species into different categories of threats and then protection it gives. And there, that's how we are trying to reduce species extinction. We have protected areas. So these are, these are some of the things that have been going on in the country for a while, but these are just merged with the goals, so that it helps you, compare your progress across time and then, together with other countries also. So yeah, that's the thing that I was think of adding. uh if you guys have anything to add, yeah, feel free to add or ask. And some of these goals, they say, are in progress, especially gender equality and some things, and they might take much more time to achieve, like even zero hunger. If you talk about, current situation with zero hunger, so for which we need to have food security. And most of the food, if you talk about, in this case, if you talk, let's have a look at this. So we are talking about shocks that are happening. This COVID-19 shock happened, and then the progress has moved to somewhere else. It perturbates and goes on. Similarly, the grain deal. So if you talk about, the conflict that's happening between Russia and Ukraine, where, which is also, Ukraine is also considered as a breadbasket of the world, right? So most of the place, most of the cultivation might not be able to, ship to other regions, or, you know these type of things, are essentially halting or reducing the progress of, achieving these goals. So yeah, for achieving some of these goals, we need to be able to, absorb those type of events, those type of shocks, so that, we can meet them together, meet those goals. Yeah, you guys, if you have anything, feel free to ask, or if you want me to repeat some of those topics, one or two of topics or clarification, I can help you with that. Yeah, so what I will suggest is, like, if you have time, you can just go Google sustainable developmental goals, try to find out more if you are really interested, because, they are such a nice way they have been, framed and kept. And yeah, so it's really they're really interesting. And yeah, I would suggest you to go, just have a look at. each of those targets of each of those goals are 17 goals. What are those different targets, and what the current status of each of those targets is. Because we as a public, are supposed to monitor, be aware of what's happening around. So yeah, that's what I will suggest. Yeah, just let me know if you have any questions. I will wait for a minute or two. If you have any questions, to let me know. It could previous assignment questions or previous sessions or any clarification from the lectures. I'll be happy to address. Okay. In case since none of you have questions, in that case, we'll stop here, and that will be the end of today's session. Yeah, yeah, that will be the end of the session. Thank you for joining. You can, yeah, you may leave.